You're already observing something right now, even before deciding what this moment means. The room, a sound, a thought, a feeling in your body. And without noticing, that first point of attention is already shaping how the next minutes will unfold. This is how reality works for all of us all the time. Two people can live the same moment and walk away with opposite experiences. One feels calm, the other feels overwhelmed. Nothing different happened. What changed was what they noticed first. That first observation quietly decided everything that followed. This isn't philosophy and it isn't motivation. It's something you can see in your own life every single day. What you pay attention to first becomes the lens for how you think, feel, and act next. The question is not whether this is happening. The question is whether you are aware of what you're choosing to notice first. You wake up and the day has already begun before you've said a word to anyone. Your eyes open. Your body sends a signal. Your mind makes a tiny decision. It happens so fast you usually miss it. But in that first quiet second, something decisive occurs. You don't meet the day as it is. You meet the first thing you notice about it. And from there, everything unfolds. Most people believe reality is made of events. The alarm rings. The weather is bad. The body feels stiff. The news is heavy. These things seem solid, objective, unavoidable. But look closer. The event itself is neutral until it passes through your attention. What shapes your experience is not the fact that you woke up tired, but whether tiredness became the first thing you noticed and believed. The moment your attention lands somewhere, it sets the tone. Like the first note in a piece of music, it defines what feels natural next. Imagine two mornings that look identical from the outside. Same house, same time, same body, same responsibilities. In one, the first thought is, I didn't sleep well. In the other, the first awareness is, I'm awake. Nothing dramatic changes, yet the inner weather is completely different. One path leads toward resistance, irritation, and a sense of burden. The other leaves room for choice. Reality didn't change, observation did. This is why so many days feel predictable, not because life lacks variety, but because attention runs on habit. The mind goes to what it knows. If it has learned to scan for discomfort, lack, or threat, it will find it instantly. And once it does, the rest of the day organizes itself around that initial focus. Conversations are interpreted through it. Memories align with it. Even neutral moments begin to echo it. Reality seems to confirm what you noticed first, but in truth, it is responding to it. This doesn't mean you're imagining things or denying what's real. Pain is real. Difficulty is real. Fatigue is real. But reality is wider than any single signal. The body can feel heavy and there can still be breath. The schedule can be full and there can still be one moment of quiet. The difference lies in what you register first, what you give the microphone to. Attention is not passive. It is an act of selection. Think of attention like a spotlight in a dark theater. The stage is full, but only one area is lit at a time. Wherever the light goes becomes the story. When the spotlight hits fatigue, fatigue becomes the narrator. When it hits possibility, possibility speaks. Neither cancels the other, but one leads and the rest follow. Many people assume they have no control here because the noticing feels automatic. It often is. Years of repetition train the mind to grab the same cues again and again. But automatic does not mean permanent. It only means practiced. The first noticing is not fate. It is conditioning. And conditioning can be gently interrupted. You may start to see how subtle this is. It's not about forcing positivity or pretending everything is fine. It's about recognizing that the first frame matters. The mind edits reality the way a camera edits film. The opening shot changes how the entire scene is understood. A close-up of tension creates one story. A wider frame creates another. This is why two people can live through the same day and tell completely different stories about it at night. One remembers what went wrong. The other remembers what held. They didn't live in different worlds. They noticed different entry points into the same world. If you pay attention to your own experience, you may notice how quickly the first observation hardens into truth. A single sensation becomes a conclusion. A single thought becomes a forecast. This is going to be a long day. From there, the body tightens, patience shortens. and small obstacles feel heavier than they are. Reality seems to agree, but it's following a script written in the first seconds. What's important here is not blame. No one chose these habits consciously. They were learned slowly, often as protection. But protection can turn into limitation when it runs unchecked. The invitation is not to fight what you notice, but to notice that you noticed it. There is a tiny gap, almost invisible, between the sensation and the story. That gap is where reality is still open. Most people skip over it without knowing it exists. But once you sense it, even briefly, something loosens. You realize that what happens is only the raw material. What you notice first is what shapes it into experience. As you move through this idea, you may begin to sense a question forming on its own, without effort. If reality follows attention, and attention is selective, then what determines where it goes? And why does the mind choose some things first and not others? That question leads naturally into understanding how the human mind filters the world, and why what you see is never the whole picture, but the authorized version your attention allows through. The mind is often compared to a mirror, but that metaphor misses something important. A mirror reflects everything in front of it. The mind does not. It filters, it chooses. It decides what enters awareness and what remains invisible, and the first place it looks becomes the rule for everything it allows in afterward. At any given moment, you are surrounded by far more information than you could ever process. Sounds, colors, memories, sensations, emotions, subtle signals from your body, shifts in the environment. Most of it never reaches consciousness, not because it isn't there, but because the mind has learned what to prioritize. Your initial gaze is like a password. It tells the system what matters. When your attention lands somewhere first, the mind assumes this is important. It then begins to search for more evidence that supports that initial focus. If the first thing you notice is tension, the mind scans the body for more tension. If the first thing you notice is threat, it scans the environment for danger. If the first thing you notice is calm, it looks for stability to match it. This happens quietly, automatically, without asking for your permission. This is why reality feels consistent, even when circumstances change. You move to a new place, meet new people, start a new chapter, yet the same patterns seem to follow you. It's not because the world is repeating itself, it's because the filter is. The mind doesn't show you the world as it is. It shows you the world it expects. There's a simple way to feel this in your own experience. Think about a day when you were in a good mood. You probably noticed small, pleasant details without trying. A kind gesture, a moment of ease, a sense of flow. Now think of a day when you felt irritated or anxious. The same world existed, but your mind highlighted different elements. Neutral events felt heavier. Small problems stood out. The filter changed, and with it, your sense of reality. The key point is that the filter is not random. It is trained by repetition. Whatever you have looked at first, again and again, becomes the default lens. The mind is efficient. It wants to save energy, so it builds shortcuts. These shortcuts become beliefs, assumptions, and emotional reflexes. Over time, they feel like facts. This is where many people get trapped without realizing it. They believe they are responding to reality, when in fact they are responding to a selection of reality shaped by their initial gaze. The mind is not lying, but it is incomplete. It shows you a version that matches its starting point. And because this process is mostly unconscious, it feels personal. This is just how things are for me. But what's actually happening is mechanical. The mind learned a pattern, and now it runs it. There is nothing wrong with you. There is just a filter at work. What makes this powerful is that the filter doesn't only affect what you see, it affects how you interpret what you see. Two people can hear the same words and walk away with opposite meanings. One hears criticism, the other hears information. The words were the same. The initial gaze was different. The mind filled in the rest. This is also why arguments persist, even when facts are shared. Each person is filtering from a different starting point. Each feels certain, each feels justified, and each believes the other is missing something obvious. In a way, they are. But not because one is blind, because both are looking through different filters. The mind's filtering system is not the enemy. It's a survival tool. Without it, you would be overwhelmed. But problems arise when the filter becomes rigid, when it always starts in the same place, especially when that place is fear, lack, or expectation of failure. Then the mind becomes a confirmation machine, constantly proving itself right. This leads to a subtle but important question. If the mind filters based on the initial gaze, who or what chooses that gaze? Is it always habit? Or is there a moment, however small, where choice exists? Most people assume the filter activates after something happens. But in truth, it activates before meaning is formed. There is a fraction of a second where attention leans one way or another. It is so quick that it feels non-existent. Yet it is there, and in that instant the direction of the entire experience is decided. The more automatic the filter becomes, the less that moment is noticed. Life then feels like a loop. The same emotions, the same reactions, the same outcomes. Not because change is impossible, but because the starting point is never questioned. As you begin to sense this, another layer becomes visible. Some filters are not just habits. They are reinforced by emotion. The mind learns that looking for problems feels familiar. It learns that expecting disappointment feels safer than being surprised. And over time, it begins to observe the problem before anything else, without even checking if something else is present. This is where the real risk lives. Not in what happens, but in what the mind is trained to look for first. And that opens the door to a deeper understanding of how many people unknowingly build their days, their relationships, and their sense of self by always observing what's wrong before anything else has a chance to speak. There is a danger that almost no one talks about because it hides in plain sight. It doesn't announce itself as fear or negativity. It often disguises itself as intelligence, responsibility, or realism. It is the habit of always observing the problem first. And once this habit settles in, it quietly shapes how a person experiences life without ever asking for consent. Most people learned this early. You were praised for spotting mistakes, warned to be careful, taught to anticipate what could go wrong. Over time, the mind connected safety with problem finding, so when a situation appears, attention goes there automatically. What's wrong? What's missing? What could fail? This feels useful. It feels mature. But something subtle happens when this becomes the first and only lens. When the problem is observed first, the body reacts before the situation is fully understood. Muscles tighten. Breathing becomes shallow. The nervous system prepares for defense. Even if the problem is small, the internal response is large. The mind then interprets this physical tension as proof that something is indeed wrong. A loop is formed, and it feels like reality confirming itself. The danger here is not that problems are noticed. Problems are part of life. The danger is that when the problem becomes the starting point, everything else is filtered through it. Possibility becomes invisible. Neutral facts feel threatening. Solutions are seen through the lens of doubt. The mind becomes busy but not clear. Over time, this habit changes how a person relates to the world. Conversations are approached with caution. Opportunities are evaluated for risk before value. Even moments of rest are scanned for something unfinished. The inner posture is always slightly leaned forward, braced for impact. This state becomes so familiar that it feels normal. What makes this particularly invisible is that the habit often brings short-term benefits. You avoid some mistakes, you catch some issues early, you feel prepared, but the long-term cost is rarely noticed. Chronic tension, reduced creativity, emotional fatigue, a sense that life is heavy, even when nothing dramatic is happening. The mind, when trained to observe problems first, begins to confuse vigilance with wisdom. But vigilance without balance turns into distortion. It shows you a world that feels more dangerous than it is. And because the filter is internal, the world appears to be the cause. This is how people come to believe that life is fundamentally hard, that things rarely work out, that ease is temporary and suspicious. Not because these beliefs are objectively true, but because the mind has been collecting evidence for them for years. Every problem noticed first becomes another data point in a story that feels undeniable. There is also an emotional cost that often goes unnamed. When the problem is always the first thing seen, appreciation arrives late or not at all. Even good moments are evaluated. Even success is inspected for flaws. Satisfaction becomes fragile, dependent on the absence of issues rather than the presence of meaning. And yet this pattern is rarely questioned. After all, who would argue against being realistic? But realism that only looks in one direction is not realism, it is partial vision. It is like standing in a room and only acknowledging the cracks in the wall while ignoring the structure that keeps the ceiling from collapsing. Another subtle effect emerges in relationships. When you observe the problem first, people feel it. They may not know why, but they sense being evaluated rather than met. Silence is interpreted as distance. Differences are seen as threats. The space where connection could grow becomes tight and conditional. What's important to understand is that this habit does not come from malice or pessimism. It comes from repetition and reinforcement. The mind learned that looking for problems kept it safe once, so it kept doing it. It never stopped to ask whether the environment had changed or whether the cost now outweighed the benefit. The real danger is not that this habit exists, but that it becomes automatic. When observation happens without awareness, it feels compulsory. There is no pause, no choice, no sense of alternatives. The mind jumps straight to the familiar lens, and reality seems to follow. But beneath this automation, something else is always present. A quiet moment before interpretation fully locks in. A brief space where attention could soften instead of tighten. Most people pass through this space without noticing it, because they've never been taught to look for it. As awareness grows, a new question begins to form. If observing the problem first shapes reality in this way, what would happen if attention learned to rest somewhere else even briefly? Not in denial, not in false optimism, but in something more neutral, more open. That question naturally leads to understanding the other side of attention itself, and how whatever you consistently focus on doesn't just feel bigger, but actually begins to expand in your lived experience. Attention is often treated like a neutral flashlight, something that simply points at what already exists. But attention is not passive. It has weight. It has influence. Wherever it rests, something begins to grow, not always outwardly, but inwardly in how reality is experienced and shaped. When you give something your attention, you don't just notice it, you feed it. The mind returns to it, the body reacts to it, emotions organize around it. What was once a small detail starts to feel central. This is not magic. It is a natural consequence of how awareness works. Repetition strengthens pathways, focus gives continuity, and continuity gives the impression of importance. You can see this clearly in everyday life. When you are worried about something, it seems to appear everywhere. Conversations circle back to it. Memories connect to it. Even unrelated events begin to feel linked. The worry didn't become larger in the world, but it expanded in your inner landscape. Attention made it dominant. The same principle works in quieter ways. If you begin to notice moments of ease, however brief, your system starts to recognize them more easily. The body softens faster. The mind doesn't rush past them as quickly. What once felt rare begins to feel accessible, not because life suddenly changed, but because attention stopped ignoring those moments. This is the hidden power most people underestimate. They think focus only reflects interest or concern. In reality, it trains perception. What you consistently focus on becomes easier to see, faster to recognize, and harder to miss. Over time, it feels like the world itself has shifted, when in fact your access to it has. This is why attention is so closely tied to emotion. Focus on threat, and the nervous system stays alert. Focus on possibility, and the system opens. The body doesn't distinguish between an external danger and an internal narrative. It responds to what attention presents as important. Many people try to change how they feel by changing circumstances, without noticing where their attention lives. They fix one problem, only to find another immediately takes its place. The environment improves, but the inner experience stays the same. This is because attention, not circumstance, is doing most of the shaping. It's important to be clear here. Focusing on something does not mean denying other aspects of reality. It means choosing where energy flows first. When attention is constantly directed toward what is wrong, the system stays in correction mode. When attention includes what is stable or workable, the system gains room to breathe. Over time, attention doesn't just expand experiences, it builds identity. You begin to see yourself as someone who struggles, or someone who adapts, someone who expects difficulty, or someone who trusts process. These identities feel personal, but they are largely the result of repeated focus. This is why change often feels so difficult. It's not because new behaviors are hard, but because attention keeps returning to old reference points. Even when something good happens, the mind checks it against past disappointment. The focus splits, and the expansion never fully takes hold. What makes this process subtle is that attention usually follows emotion, but emotion also follows attention. They feed each other. A small irritation receives focus, which strengthens it, which pulls more focus. Without awareness, this cycle runs indefinitely. And yet, attention can be redirected without force, not by commanding the mind to think differently, but by gently noticing where it already goes. The moment you see the pattern, even briefly, you are no longer fully inside it. Awareness loosens the grip. This is not about forcing yourself to focus on positive things. Forced focus creates tension. The system knows when it's being pushed. The real shift happens when attention widens, when it includes rather than replaces. When you allow more of reality into the frame, what dominates begins to change naturally. For example, a challenging situation may still be there, but it no longer fills the entire field. You notice your breath. You notice a small decision you can make. You notice that the difficulty has edges, not just weight. Attention no longer compresses experience into a single point. This widening is where expansion becomes constructive rather than exhausting. Instead of amplifying fear or frustration, attention begins to amplify clarity. Not certainty, but orientation, a sense of where to place the next step. As this understanding deepens, another pattern becomes visible. When attention returns to the same place day after day, it doesn't just expand that experience in the moment. It begins to write a script over time, a story that feels like destiny, even though it started as a habit of focus. And that realization opens the door to seeing how unconscious repetition quietly builds an automatic future, one observation at a time. There is a moment when a thought feels familiar, almost comfortable even if it isn't kind. It shows up without effort, carries a certain tone, and seems to know exactly where to go next. Most people don't question this familiarity. They assume it's personality or history or just the way life is. But what's actually at work is repetition. And repetition, when left unconscious, is one of the most powerful forces shaping destiny. The mind learns by doing the same thing again and again. Whatever you focus on repeatedly becomes the easiest path for attention to take. Like walking the same trail through a field, each pass flattens the grass a little more. Eventually, it feels natural to walk there, even when other paths are available. Unconscious focus works the same way. When you consistently notice the same types of signals, the mind assumes they are important. If you repeatedly observe rejection, it becomes sensitive to it. If you repeatedly observe struggle, it begins to expect it. This expectation doesn't stay in the mind. It influences posture, tone of voice, timing, and decisions. Small choices start to align with the familiar pattern. This is how destiny begins to take shape, not as a dramatic event, but as a quiet accumulation. A person who expects difficulty hesitates more. Hesitation leads to missed opportunities. Missed opportunities confirm the belief. The loop tightens and what began as focus becomes outcome. What makes this trap difficult to see is that each repetition feels justified. After all, the evidence seems real. This always happens to me. But the mind rarely considers how often it has been looking for the same thing. Repetition creates memory, and memory creates expectation. Expectation then guides attention, and attention collects more evidence. This cycle doesn't require strong emotions to operate. It can run on subtle assumptions, a slight doubt, a habitual sigh, a quick mental conclusion. Over years, these small movements of attention add up. Life begins to feel scripted, as if events are following a predetermined arc. The repetition trap also explains why people can feel stuck, even when they are working hard. Effort is being applied, but focus remains the same. New actions are layered on top of old attention patterns. The outer life changes, but the inner filter keeps reproducing familiar experiences. It's important to understand that this is not punishment or failure. It is a neutral mechanism. The mind is doing what it does best, reinforcing what it practices. Destiny in this sense is not imposed from the outside. It is trained from the inside. You can see this clearly in how people talk about their lives. Certain phrases repeat themselves across years. The same themes surface in different contexts. Different jobs, same frustrations. Different relationships, same conflicts. The details change, but the emotional storyline stays consistent. This consistency feels like truth. It feels like identity. I'm just this kind of person. But identity too is shaped by repetition. The more you observe yourself struggling, the more that becomes who you think you are. The more you observe yourself coping, adapting, or learning, the more those qualities take root. The trap deepens because repetition feels safe. The known, even when uncomfortable, feels more predictable than the unknown. The mind would rather repeat a familiar pattern than risk a new one, so it keeps directing attention to what it already understands, reinforcing the same future. What often goes unnoticed is that repetition begins long before results appear. Destiny is not created at the moment something happens. It is created in the thousands of small moments when attention goes to the same place without being questioned. And yet, repetition can work in another direction. The same mechanism that builds limitation can build freedom, but only if it becomes conscious. Awareness interrupts the automatic loop. The moment you see a pattern repeating, it loses some of its authority. It no longer feels inevitable. It becomes observable. This doesn't mean the pattern disappears immediately. Paths that have been walked for years don't vanish overnight. But once you know you're on a path, you can slow down. You can look around. You can notice where else attention could go, even briefly. Change doesn't begin with a grand decision. It begins with noticing the repetition as it happens, catching the familiar thought before it finishes its sentence, feeling the body prepare for an expected outcome, and pausing just enough to let something else in. As this awareness grows, something subtle but powerful becomes available. The realization that not every event needs to be interpreted the same way it always has, that the first observation doesn't have to come from habit, and that in the space between an event and its meaning, there is room for a different reality to begin forming, one choice at a time in the smallest moments where attention learns to look somewhere new. Imagine a moment so ordinary that it almost doesn't deserve attention. A message goes unanswered. A door closes quietly. A person you expected to hear from doesn't speak. Nothing dramatic happens. No clear signal is given. And yet, inside two different people, two completely different realities are born from the exact same event. One person feels a tightening in the chest. The silence is read as rejection. The mind fills in the gap quickly. Something is wrong. I did something wrong. This is going to end badly. The body responds as if a threat has appeared. Memory joins in, pulling up similar moments from the past. The event becomes personal, heavy, and emotional. The other person notices the same silence and feels something else. Space, neutrality. Perhaps the thought arises that the other person is busy or simply quiet by nature. There is no immediate story. The body stays relatively relaxed. Attention moves on without friction. The event passes without leaving a mark. What's striking is that neither person is lying, neither is irrational. They are both responding honestly to what they perceive. The difference is not in the event, but in what each observer noticed first and how their attention organized meaning around it. This happens constantly, in ways so subtle they are rarely examined. A tone of voice, a facial expression, a delayed response. The world is full of ambiguous moments. The mind dislikes ambiguity, so it resolves it quickly, using past experience as a guide. What it chooses as the starting point determines the reality that follows. In the first observer, the initial focus lands on threat. That focus activates a familiar pattern. The mind knows this territory well. It has walked it many times. The story forms almost instantly. Emotion follows, behavior adjusts. perhaps the person becomes guarded, distant, or reactive. The relationship begins to shift, not because of what happened, but because of how it was observed. In the second observer, the initial focus does not land on threat. The ambiguity remains open a little longer. Without urgency, the mind doesn't rush to conclusion. There is room for multiple explanations. No defensive posture is triggered. Behavior stays flexible. The relationship remains unchanged. From the outside, both people experienced the same moment. From the inside, they lived in different worlds. This is how realities diverge without anyone noticing the fork in the road. This example extends far beyond relationships. The same feedback at work can be heard as criticism or as guidance. The same setback can be seen as failure or as information. The same change can be felt as loss or as relief. In each case, the event is only the starting material. Observation shapes the outcome. What's important to recognize is that the mind does not wait for proof before it commits. It commits based on familiarity. Whichever interpretation feels most known is selected first. And once selected, everything else aligns to support it. Evidence is gathered, feelings intensify, the reality becomes self-reinforcing. This is why arguments often go nowhere. Each person is defending a reality that feels obvious to them. They are not just disagreeing on facts. They are living inside different interpretations that began at the level of attention, not logic. The real turning point is not convincing the other person. It is noticing how quickly your own mind settles on one meaning over another. That settling feels like clarity, but it is often habit, and habit moves fast. If you slow the process down even slightly, you can feel the moment before meaning solidifies. There is a brief openness where the event has not yet become a story. Most people miss this moment because they have never been taught to look for it. But it is there. In that space, something important becomes possible. You realize that multiple realities are available, not in a theoretical sense, but in a lived one. The same moment can lead to tension or ease, distance or connection, contraction or expansion. This doesn't mean you should always choose the most pleasant interpretation. It means recognizing that interpretation is happening at all. Awareness brings choice where there used to be reflex. As this awareness grows, attention begins to shift earlier in the process. You start to notice the very first second, the initial movement of the mind toward meaning. And you begin to understand why that first second matters more than the event itself, because it is the place where direction is chosen before emotion takes over. There is a moment so small that it usually goes unnoticed. It doesn't announce itself with words or emotions. It appears as a pause that is almost too quick to feel. And yet this moment quietly determines the direction of everything that follows. The first second after something happens is the most sacred moment of choice, not because it is dramatic, but because it is still open. Before emotion fully forms, before the story locks in, before the body commits to tension or defense, there is a brief window. In that window, attention is not yet fixed. It leans, but it hasn't landed. Most people move through this space on autopilot. The mind snaps to what it knows and the opportunity disappears. But when this moment is noticed, even faintly, something changes. This first second is not about thinking differently, it's about sensing differently. The body registers a signal before the mind explains it. A tightening, a quick breath, a subtle shift. If attention rushes to interpret, the body follows the interpretation. But if attention stays with the raw sensation just a fraction longer, the system remains flexible. What makes this moment sacred is that it is the last point before reaction becomes momentum. Once emotion takes over, it carries the mind with it. Thoughts speed up. Memory joins in. The nervous system commits to a posture. From there, choice becomes harder, not impossible but constrained. Most people believe they choose how they react. In reality, most reactions are already decided by the time awareness arrives. The first second is where choice actually lives. It is where observation can remain neutral instead of collapsing into judgment. This moment doesn't feel powerful. It feels ordinary. That's why it's missed. There is no sense of control or triumph. There is just a subtle noticing. Something is happening. That noticing alone creates space. In that space, you may notice that the urge to label is strong. The mind wants to name what is happening, to resolve uncertainty. This urge is not a problem, it is a survival reflex. But it doesn't have to be obeyed immediately. When attention stays with the first second, the event remains just an event a little longer. It hasn't yet become a personal story. This delay may only last a heartbeat, but it changes the entire trajectory. Emotion still arises, but it arises in a wider field. It is felt, not fused with identity. This is where many people misunderstand conscious observation. They think it means suppressing emotion or staying calm at all costs. In reality, it means allowing emotion to arrive without letting it decide the meaning too quickly. It means feeling without immediately concluding. The sacredness of the first second lies in its humility. There is no grand insight there, no answer, just presence. And presence is what interrupts automation. As this practice deepens, you may notice that the first second has a physical signature. For some, it's a pause in the breath. For others, it's a tightening in the jaw or a quick drop in the stomach. These signals are invitations. They are not warnings. They are doorways. When you recognize these signals, you begin to arrive earlier in your own experience. You meet the moment before the mind has finished writing its script. This doesn't make life predictable. It makes it more alive. There will still be times when the first second is missed. Habits are strong. Speed is seductive. This is not a failure. Awareness does not require perfection. It grows through repetition, just like habit did. Over time, something subtle shifts. The first second begins to stretch. What was once invisible becomes familiar. You notice the lean of attention before it hardens into certainty. And in that noticing, the sense of being trapped by reactions begins to loosen. This is where the next question naturally arises. If the first second holds this much power, what happens when it's already been missed? When the mind has already latched onto something negative, when the story is already running, when emotion is already loud, is the path fixed at that point, or is there still a way to redirect attention after the fact? Even with awareness, there will be moments when attention lands on something negative before you realize what's happening. A sharp thought, a heavy feeling, a familiar story already in motion. This is not a mistake. It is part of being human. The mind is fast and habits are well rehearsed. What matters is not catching the first second every time, but knowing that focus can still be redirected after it has settled somewhere unhelpful. Most people assume that once a negative observation appears, the experience is locked in. The mood is set. The day is ruined. But attention is not a one-time decision. It is adjustable. It can move, even midstream. The key is understanding how to do this without fighting yourself. The first thing to recognize is that resistance strengthens what you're trying to escape. When you tell yourself you shouldn't feel this way, the mind tightens. The negative focus becomes more central, not less. Redirection begins with acknowledgement, not rejection. When you notice that attention has landed on something heavy, the most effective move is to slow down the interpretation. You don't need to analyze the thought or correct it. You simply need to stop adding new layers to it. Let it be one thought, not a story. This often starts in the body. The body reacts faster than the mind, and it also calms faster. Bringing attention to physical sensation anchors awareness in the present moment, not to escape the thought, but to widen the field so the thought is no longer alone. As the field widens, something interesting happens. The negative observation loses its sense of totality. It becomes one element among others. The problem is still there, but it no longer fills the entire space. Redirection is not about choosing a better thought. It's about choosing a different level of attention. Instead of focusing on meaning, you focus on experience. Instead of asking, "What does this mean?" you stay with, "What is happening right now?" This shift may seem small, but it changes the nervous system's response. The body begins to sense that it is not under immediate threat. Breathing becomes more even. Muscles soften slightly. From this state, the mind becomes more flexible. Once flexibility returns, attention can move naturally. You might notice something stable, something functional, something neutral. A sound in the room, the feeling of your feet on the ground, the fact that despite the discomfort, you are still here, still breathing. still able to choose the next small action. This is how redirection works in practice, not by erasing the negative, but by reducing its dominance. Attention doesn't abandon the problem, it stops orbiting it. Over time, this process retrains the mind. Each time you redirect without force, you weaken the old pattern and strengthen a new one. The mind learns that it doesn't have to stay stuck once it notices something unpleasant. There is another option. What's important here is patience. The mind may try to return to the negative focus again and again. This is not failure. It's habit losing its grip slowly. Each redirection is a small success, even if it lasts only a few seconds. Eventually, you may notice a subtle change. The moment you observe something negative, there is less panic, less urgency to solve or escape. The observation is still there, but it doesn't hijack the entire system. This is where conscious observation begins to feel empowering rather than exhausting. You realize that attention is not a trap. It is a skill, and like any skill, it improves with gentle repetition. As this skill develops, attention starts to shift more quickly. You spend less time inside reactive loops. The mind becomes less dramatic. Experience feels more spacious even when it's not pleasant. And with this space, another dimension of observation begins to emerge. You start to sense that attention doesn't just affect your mood or your reactions, but your overall state of being. That observation itself carries a certain quality, almost like a frequency, shaping not just how you feel, but how you resonate with life around you. At a certain point, observation stops feeling like a mental skill and begins to feel like something deeper, not mystical in a dramatic sense, but subtle and foundational. You start to notice that how you observe doesn't just shape your thoughts or emotions. It shapes your inner atmosphere, your state, your presence. This is where observation becomes a kind of spiritual frequency portal. The word frequency can sound abstract, but the experience is simple. Think about how you feel around someone who is calm and grounded. They don't need to say anything. Their presence alone affects the room. Now think about being around someone who is constantly tense or reactive. Again, no words are needed. You feel it. This is frequency in lived form. Observation plays a central role in this because it determines the quality of your inner signal. When attention is sharp, defensive, or constantly scanning for problems, the inner field becomes tight. The body hums with vigilance. Thoughts cluster around control and protection. That state radiates outward, subtly shaping how you interact with the world. When observation is open, curious, and grounded in the present, the inner field changes. The body settles. The breath deepens. Thoughts slow down. You don't become passive or detached. You become coherent. And coherence is felt both internally and externally. This is not about believing in something invisible. It's about noticing cause and effect. How you observe determines how you resonate. How you resonate influences what you notice next. A loop forms, not just psychologically, but energetically, in how your whole system is organized. When attention is fragmented, jumping from worry to worry, the inner signal is noisy. Decisions feel harder. Intuition feels distant. Life feels like effort. When attention is steady, even in difficulty, the signal clears. You may not know the answer, but you know where you stand. There is a sense of alignment, even without certainty. This is why observation has always been central to spiritual traditions, even when described in different language. Not as a way to escape reality, but as a way to inhabit it more fully. The quality of awareness determines the quality of experience. What makes observation a portal is that it connects inner state with outer experience. When your attention rests on conflict, you tune into a field of conflict. When it rests on meaning, you tune into a field of meaning. These fields are not supernatural. They are patterns of perception, emotion, and behavior reinforcing each other. You can feel this shift within minutes. Spend time observing what irritates you and notice how your body feels. Then spend time observing something simple and steady, like your breath or a quiet sound. The external world hasn't changed, but your inner world has. That change affects how you meet the next moment. This is where responsibility comes in, not as burden, but as agency. You may not control what appears in your life, but you participate in how you meet it. Observation is the meeting point, As this becomes clearer, you may notice that certain states attract certain experiences, not because the universe is rewarding or punishing you, but because your state influences your actions, your timing, your openness. A tense system misses cues. A receptive system notices them. This doesn't mean you should always aim to feel good. Authentic observation includes discomfort. The difference is whether discomfort is met with presence or resistance. Presence keeps the field open. Resistance contracts it. Over time, observing in this way creates a sense of trust. Not that everything will work out, but that you can meet whatever arises without losing yourself. That trust is felt as stability. Others sense it. Life responds to it. As observation becomes less about control and more about connection, another pattern becomes visible. Many people try to change their lives by changing external conditions, without realizing that the observing state travels with them. The same frequency recreates the same experience in new forms, and that recognition naturally leads to seeing the common mistake people make when they attempt to change reality without changing how they observe it. Many people reach a point where they feel certain that something in their life needs to change. The job, the relationship, the routine, the city, the schedule. There is a strong sense that the environment is the problem, and if the environment changes, everything else will follow. Sometimes these changes are necessary. But there is a mistake that quietly repeats itself, trying to change life without changing how you observe it. At first, the change feels hopeful. A new beginning carries energy. The mind imagines relief. There is movement, and movement feels like progress. But after some time, something familiar returns. The same tension, the same dissatisfaction, the same emotional patterns, just wearing different clothes. And confusion sets in. Why does this keep happening, even when I've changed everything? What most people don't see is that observation travels with them. The same filter, the same starting point of attention, the same habits of interpretation. The outer scene may be new, but the inner lens is not. And the lens determines what stands out, what feels heavy, and what gets reinforced. If someone leaves a stressful job but continues to observe life through urgency and pressure, stress will reappear. If someone ends a relationship but continues to observe others through fear of abandonment, the same dynamic will form again. The circumstances change, but the experience stays consistent. This is not a failure of effort. It's a misunderstanding of cause. Life doesn't respond only to what you do. It responds to how you perceive while doing it. Observation is not secondary, it is foundational. Many self-improvement paths focus on behavior, goals, and discipline. These have value, but without attention to observation, they become exhausting. You work harder, try more, adjust endlessly, yet something remains unchanged at the core. The effort increases, but ease does not. The mistake lies in believing that perception is a fixed trait rather than a living process. People say, "That's just how I see things," without realizing how much that seeing has been practiced. Observation feels like truth, but it is often habit reinforced by emotion and memory. Changing observation does not mean ignoring problems or pretending everything is fine. It means noticing where attention goes first and questioning whether that starting point is still useful. It means recognizing that the same environment can produce different experiences depending on how it is met. This is why two people can make the same life change and have opposite results. One moves to a new place and feels liberated. The other moves and feels lonely. The difference is not the place. It's what each one notices first upon arrival. When observation remains unchanged, even positive changes can feel disappointing. Success brings new worries. Freedom brings new anxieties. Rest brings guilt. The mind recreates familiar tension because it doesn't know another way to organize experience. The deeper cost of this mistake is subtle. Over time, people begin to distrust change itself. They stop believing that something truly different is possible. They conclude that life is just repetitive, or that they are the problem. But the real issue has been overlooked. Observation is the interface between you and reality. If the interface stays the same, the output will feel the same. Changing the interface changes the entire interaction. This is also why some people seem to improve their lives without dramatic external shifts. They stay in the same job, the same relationship, the same body, yet something inside relaxes. Clarity increases. Choices become cleaner. Life feels more responsive. What changed was not the world, but the way it was being observed. As this understanding settles in, a new kind of responsibility emerges. Not the heavy kind that blames, but the honest kind that empowers. You begin to see that change is not something you wait for. It is something you participate in moment by moment, through where and how you place your attention. And with that realization, the focus naturally turns inward again, towards something practical and immediate. If observation shapes experience this deeply, then it must be something that can be trained, refined, and practiced. Not as a theory, but as a daily way of meeting life from the very first moment you open your eyes. The true power has never been in trying to control life. It has always been in the first place you look when life presents itself. That first focus sets the tone, shapes the meaning, and quietly decides what becomes possible next. And the most important part is this: it can be trained. You don't need to wait for circumstances to improve before you feel clearer. You don't need life to become easier before you become steadier. The shift begins in the smallest moment, when attention chooses where to land. Each time you notice that moment, even briefly, you are strengthening a new way of meeting reality. Nothing here requires perfection. It requires honesty, a willingness to see how observation has been shaping your days, and a gentle commitment to choose again when you can. Over time, that choice becomes natural, and what once felt automatic begins to feel open. If you stayed with this all the way to the end, write this sentence in the comments: I choose my first focus. And if this resonated with you, watch one of the videos appearing on the screen now. If you want more reflections like this, that's where the journey continues.